Testing. Music boleh. Okay, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Very good evening. Selamat malam. How are you? I see a lot of you. Okay, but I cannot see everyone. Boleh terangkan dewan ni tak? So, semuanya ada lawyer di sini? Tidak juga. Siapa lawyer boleh angkat tangan? Oh, ramai juga lawyer. Lawyers, okay. Penceramah kita ada lawyer. Okay, kita ada penceramah, seorang penceramah yang kita bawa dari Australia. Okay, boleh terang lagi lampu? Supaya saya nampak wajah-wajah dia. Oh, okay, nampak. Thank you very much. Give a big hand to our friends di konsol. Kawan. Okay. Saya kena bercakap dua bahasa sebenarnya. Sebab ada orang yang bukan berbahasa Melayu. So, we are celebrating World Space Week from 4th of October to 10th of October. Jadi, kita meraihkan Minggu Angkasa Sedunia. Okay? This is a declaration by United Nations supaya semua orang bercakap tentang space minggu ini. So, itu sebab kita berada di sini. Okay? That's why we are here, to talk about space. Whatever, space law. And tonight, we are going to talk about space law. Okay. Before we start, siapa ada iPhone? Boleh angkat tangan? Android? Boleh angkat tangan? Yang lain apa? Kalau pakai Android dengan iPhone? Oh, Nokia. Anyone with Nokia? Okay, but thanks to Nokia, dia yang mulakan ni, bagus eh? Okay, now, how do you know that your time is correct, accurate? Are you sure your smartphone time is accurate? Why? Why yes? Our lawyers, please. Okay, sebelum saya ke pentas pada petang tadi saya buka internet. Quora. Quora. Semua tahu How do mobile phone keep accurate time? How? Okay, now, this is the answer. As soon as someone turns their mobile phone on, it sends a timing signal and receives an accurate time from the nearest cell phone tower or the satellites. Anyone with iPhone? Oh, lagi ramai angkat sekali. Oh, semua iPhone. Why iPhone? Because iOS based. What is that? iOS based. iPhone. Even get their time from GPS signals straight, as all satellites have an atomic clock which shows accurate time. iPhone direct dengan satelit terus. Dibetulkan time kita. Okay, right. Give a big hand. Okay, depending upon the kind of technology, CDMA or GSM or operating system, your phone uses. It could either fetch its data from a cell phone tower, which gets its time from satellites, or it could directly get it from a satellite as well. So, phone kita akan dapat time daripada sama ada cell phone tower ataupun terus daripada satellite. That's why time is always accurate. Okay? Dia tak lari sangat. In both cases, the time is quite accurate within seconds, as they all get their timings from an atomic clock and have an offset of 15 seconds. In case of iPhones, to show the most accurate time, which is often accurate to few milliseconds. 1 second, milli, divided by 1000, and that is the least inaccuracy. Okay, so thanks to satellite, because it helped us to give an accurate time today, that we refer our smartphone for time also. Okay, so we are celebrating World Space Week tonight, 2024, with the theme. Okay, the theme is space and climate change. Why do we sit here? Climate change and law. What is the relation? Okay, the answer is here. I will read the text. Humanity increasingly relies on space-based technology to monitor and mitigate the impacts of climate change. So, climate change will be monitored also by satellites. Okay, thank you. Give a big hand to our friends. Satellite is monitoring our Earth. Okay, whether through satellite data, early warning system, or communication infrastructure. In the meantime, we are confronted with the growing risk of, first, space debris. Pernah dengar space debris? Serpihan angkasa. Okay, jadi kita ada Bahagian Penguasa Angkasa dari Kementerian Sains, Teknologi, Inovasi, Cik Fairuz sebagai penguasa angkasa. Boleh bangun Cik Fairuz? Beliaulah yang membawa Profesor Steven Freeland pada malam ini untuk memberikan ceramah. Okey, dan kemudian overcrowding in orbit. Orbit pun dah penuh. Macam parking ya, parking dah penuh sekarang ni, satellite. Siapa lambat hantar? Sorry. Kena parking tepi jalan. Okey. And then also space related conflicts. Kita tak tahu macam-macam space punya konflik ya. Okey. Due to these pressing issues, we bring you tonight Emeritus Professor Steven Freeland. Who will talk about the essential need to preserve the long-term usability or sustainability of outer space. Dia akan cakap kenapa kita kena sustain, kita kena sustain supaya jam kita sentiasa tepat untuk 1000 tahun daripada sekarang. Kalau tak sustain, jam lari semua. Okay, so we have to keep our satellites healthy and safe, so that we will get accurate time. Okay, bangun-bangun tengok jam betul. Okay, bukan bangun-bangun pagi, right? 2 petang dia lari. Okay, alright. And then he will delve into the legal, dia seorang profesor dalam bidang undang-undang, policy and technological frameworks to maintain a safe and cooperative space environment, emphasizing the importance of international collaboration to address these pressing issues. Okay, jadi ada 3 perkara: legal, policy and technological framework, also emphasizing on collaboration, the international collaboration. So Emeritus Professor Steven Freeland is an Emeritus Professor of International Law at Western Sydney University. He served as Dean of the School of Law at Western Sydney University from 2017 to 2019, 2 tahun, and a professorial fellow at Bond University, Australia. Jadi dia di 2 universiti ya. Dan his expertise includes international criminal law, space law, public international law, and human rights law. Ada 4 kepakaran ya. In terms of experience, visiting positions at top institutions worldwide and taught in over 20 countries. Pernah mengajar di 20 negara. Visiting professional at the International Criminal Court, ICC. Okay, sebagai profesional di International Criminal Court. As a special advisor to the Danish Foreign Ministry on ICC matters. Denmark Jadi beliau menasihatkan negara Denmark mengenai isu-isu berkaitan dengan ICC. Advises countries on space activity regulation. Okay. As Vice Chair of the COPUOS Working Group on Space Resource Activities. COPUOS ialah Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Jadi ini satu komiti yang memastikan space diguna untuk keadaan aman di dunia ini. Ada satu badan, okay, United Nations yang berjabat di Vienna, dia akan jaga. Tidak ada mana-mana negara yang akan menggunakan space untuk keganasan. Jadi space akan kekal peaceful selagi badan ini berfungsi dengan baik. Okay? Dan a prolific scholar, he has authored nearly 300 publications, 300 penerbitan, and presented papers in over 40 countries, lebih daripada 40 negara dia telah membentangkan kajian. Okay, Emeritus Professor Steven Freeland, you have the floor, sir.
Selamat malam. It's lovely to be here. Thank you. Thank you for coming to this wonderful, wonderful place. It's my first time in the National Planetarium, but it won't be my last. Thank you so much, Samri, for your kind introduction and the invitation to be here. And as I say, thank you to everybody for coming. How many people here would call themselves a space junkie already? Put up your hand if you think you're a space junkie. Not many. At the end of this talk, hopefully a few more hands will go up. It's such a pleasure to be here. We've come from Australia to have some discussions with your government. The Malaysian government is very interested in space, very active in space. They are a very responsible spacefaring country. Baros, who stood up before the space regulator, and his team are highly professional. But the beauty is they still want to learn more, and there is so much about space that is fantastic. And what I'd like to do today is just talk a little bit about space and why it's so important. I've prepared a whole range of slides, but as I was preparing to think what I was going to say, maybe I won't show you all of these slides because there's lots of words, and I'd rather just give you some general thoughts about why space is what it is. So, how many people today, well, you've all used your GPS on your phone. How many people today looked at what the weather forecast was going to be? And in Malaysia you have to, right? Yep. I think nobody's putting up their hand. This is audience participation. You're allowed to react. But everybody would have looked at the weather forecast. We can only do that because of space. How many people perhaps went to an ATM machine today to take money out of a machine? You could only do that because of space technology. How many people turned on the lights in their house? Space technology. How many people, well, perhaps not many caught a plane today, but you would have been taken some sort of transport or public network because of space. Your farmers manage their crops or their whatever they have in their farms because of space. Your rainy season, when you have storms and perhaps worse, is all monitored because of space. As we heard from our distinguished MC, climate change, that incredible challenge that we have for all of humanity, Without space, we would not be able to monitor things, and without being able to monitor it, we wouldn't even be able to know how to start to deal with it. Space is part of the critical infrastructure of every person on the planet. Oh, and it works. Space it's different from anything else you would think of. Every country, every community, every society, every household, every individual in the world is affected by space. I often say that every person on the planet is touched by space. And you might think, well, what's he talking about? But when you begin to think about how incredibly dependent we are on space technology for everything that we do, you will use space every day in your lives 20 or 30 or 40 times each day without even thinking about it. And it's not just the GPS in your phone, as important as that is, as our dear friend Zamri said. You will use space every day. Imagine a day without space. Can you imagine? I mean, the people from the schools and the universities that are here, imagine a day without your phone. People would think that would be a disaster. Imagine a day without the internet. Imagine a day without electricity. Imagine a day where the sewerage system would collapse. Imagine a day where the transportation system would collapse, the financial system would collapse. Imagine all of that. If we move space to a state where we cannot use it anymore, and so we talk about the sustainability of space. If we move it to that point, then literally we will all be back in the Dark Ages. Literally, we will be in the Dark Ages. Since we've been able to go to space, okay, question for the audience. What happened in 1957 that is relevant for today, for this talk? Someone scream out a name of something. Sputnik 1. In 1957, on what date? The 4th of October. So it's no coincidence that we have World Space Week starting on the 4th of October. On the 4th of October, 1957, the whole world changed. The then Soviet Union was able to send a human-made object into Earth orbit. We heard someone talk about orbit. There are many orbits around the Earth. But to utilize space, we need to have the capacity to put things into orbit. And to put things into orbit is not easy. Because, of course, anything that you send up will be dragged down by the gravitational pull of the Earth. And so, to get something into orbit, launching it, you have to get it to a position where it has such a velocity, such a speed, that that speed can counteract at least the immediate effects of the drag of the Earth. Think of this. Everybody close your eyes for a minute and imagine that you've got a tennis ball at the end of a piece of string and you're twirling that tennis ball around above your head like this. You can open your eyes so you can see what I'm doing. And you're twirling it around and the ball's up there. And imagine then what happens when you slow down. What's going to happen? the ball will fall on your head, yeah, because of gravity. Gravity is this extraordinary thing. And so to get something up there and keep it up there in orbit, by and large, although gravity will still have an effect, you have to get it to this incredible velocity. So depending on where something is in Earth orbit, and as I say, there are many, many, many orbits, ranging from, let's say, 250 kilometers above the Earth to 36,000 kilometers above the Earth, and more. But within that incredible range, we have satellites that service us and help humanity. But depending on which orbit you're in, you are traveling at, let us say, somewhere between 7 and 15 kilometers per second. Okay, I'll say that again, per second. And so, if two things are traveling at that incredible velocity, and if they happen to collide, what will happen? They will destroy each other, and what will also happen is they will break up into many pieces, which themselves will be in that orbit. The creation of, as we heard, space debris. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that challenge of what space debris is, and how that will threaten, literally, the future of humanity. When we talk about sustainability, because that's the theme of this talk, although sustainability means different things to different people. There are different definitions, if you like, at law, at the United Nations, about what sustainability is. And we often now talk about the sustainability of space activities and preserving the stability, safety, security, and sustainability of outer space. But in simple terms, what we're talking about is using something in a way that, of course, we can benefit from, but at the same time, not disenfranchising the future generations in their ability also to use it. So we have to use something in a way that allows for benefits now, but will also allow future generations to benefit. And you hear about the sustainability of Earth. I was speaking to a wonderful person here in the audience beforehand who is very much involved in Malaysia's efforts to engage in sustainable technology through hydropower. So sustainability is an incredibly important aspect of our life on Earth. You probably all will have heard of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations, the whole community of the world, had agreed as the goals to help eradicate poverty and disease and inequality and all sorts of aspects. Sustainability is crucial. What is perhaps less understood is that to have sustainability on Earth for all of us, you need to have sustainability in space, because we are so dependent on space. So sustainability is using something in a way that will not stop future generations from using something. So what do I mean by future generations? Obviously, when we talk about future generations, people are often talking about, our children and perhaps our children's children. Now, I come from Australia, and we have our First Nations people who have lived in our country, it's their traditional land, for 65,000 years. soon going to be 66,000 years, I understand. In fact, the reason I'm wearing this shirt, this is a design, a pattern based on some indigenous perspectives. And our First Nations people are often referred to as the world's first astronomers. We're going to see a program after this talk. I'll try to be quick because the program will be fantastic, called We Are Astronomers. Well, the world's first astronomers, I proudly say, are the Australian Indigenous people. And they have had that incredible benefit of 3,500, 4,000 generations to learn and understand the place of humanity in a broad ecosystem, this circle of life and death and regeneration and all of that. And this ecosystem includes not only our immediate surroundings, but the Earth around us, but also the space around us. And they have incredible perspectives and knowledge about space. Indeed, if you look at the logo of the Australian Space Agency, I have had the pleasure of being on the advisory board of the Australian Space Agency for many years. Our logo is a map of Australia based on Indigenous perspectives of space. And our First Nations people teach us much, as I say, and one of the things they say when we talk about future generations is not one generation forward or two, but they talk about this concept, and of course, you know, I'm not a First Nations person, I don't speak for them, but their concept is 7+ generations forward. So when you think about sustainability from, if you like, our perspective, my perspective, maybe you're thinking about one generation, maybe you're thinking about 2 generations, and you think, well, okay, I have to tailor my activities now to preserve what I'm using for those 2 generations. But if you think about Indigenous perspectives about future generations, if you're talking about 7+ generations, that's 200 years. A generation is usually about 25 years. That's 200 years. And so if I'm thinking about sustainability from one perspective, and then, which is maybe 25 years or 50 years, if you put a number to it, and another perspective, which is 200 years, then your actions will be different again. And so we have to think sensitively and carefully about sustainability on Earth. And as I said, sustainability on Earth is very much dependent upon sustainability in space, because space is something that has allowed humanity to survive and prosper. There are so many incredible benefits that we get from space. Incredible benefits. So, it's no exaggeration, I think, as I say, that the future of humanity, not just you, not just your children or children's children, but that different perspective about the future, that 7 generations plus, it's no exaggeration to say that that future is dependent upon the way we act now when it comes to space. So what is space? Why do we need rules about space? So I'm an international lawyer. I have the privilege of advising countries and companies, and I've been appointed by the UN to help, with many other people, to formulate governance frameworks for the way we use space. Space is this area from a legal perspective, and we learned that immediately from Sputnik in 1957. And by the way, I always say this, Sputnik, I am a Sputnik baby. I was born in 1957. And I know also that 1957 is a very important year for this country, 31st of August. So 1957 is a great year, we should all celebrate it. But Sputnik taught us something from a legal perspective. It taught us that unlike the airspace above us, which is by and large controlled from a legal perspective and a governance perspective by the country below it. So, for example, Malaysian law, and you have much law in this area, Malaysian law controls the airspace above Malaysia. Malaysia can determine what happens in the airspace, who can come in, etc., etc. But Sputnik, which went in and started orbiting around the world, I think Sputnik orbited for about 3 months and obviously flew over countries. And nobody said, when Sputnik was going, that the Soviet Union needed their permission or they were trespassing or infringing on their sovereignty. And so we immediately understood that where Sputnik was, and so we'll call that outer space, was different from airspace. And the reality is, Malaysian law applies to the airspace above Malaysia, but Malaysian law does not apply to the outer space above Malaysia. Instead, outer space is this area that we call beyond national jurisdiction. It's like a global commons. How we treat it is this: we all have a stake in it. Not me, not you, not you, not you individually. No country can claim space or any part of it. It's part of everything that we all have a stake in. And so a fundamental idea about space is that everybody is free to go there. Everybody is free to go there. Some of you might have been to London. And London, they have a lot of parks called commons, yes? Some of you, anyway, those who've been to London, you go to a common. And what's a common? You know, this is something that has emerged over many, many centuries in feudal England. A common is an area that everybody is free to go to. There's no restriction. The problem with the common is that if we're all free to go there, but there are no rules, then we'll destroy that common. There's been, there was a discussion, there's a in sociology called the tragedy of the commons. And it was coined by this philosopher, this sociologist in the 1970s. And he said this: imagine in the olden days that I worked on the land and I had one day off and I managed to own 3 or 4 sheep. And the person down the road also managed to own 3 or 4 sheep. Now, day off, I would have to think, what am I going to do on my life? My sheep are hungry. I'm going to take them to the commons and they can eat the grass. And the person down the road is going to do the same thing. And the person there is going to do the same thing. And if there are no rules applying to that commons, and everybody just takes their sheep to benefit themselves, but there's no management, what will happen? That commons will be destroyed. There'll be no grass there at some point. And so space is this global commons. As a fundamental principle, everybody can go to space. And as I said, there are extraordinary benefits for our space activities. So that freedom to go, the fact that I can't say you're not allowed to go, is a really good thing. And it reflects the idea this is a commons. But we need to have law, we need to have rules, so that we avoid this tragedy of the commons, this destruction of the commons. And so we have lots and lots and lots of law, international law, so not Malaysian law, not Australian law, but international law, which is essentially law that the countries agree amongst themselves that sets standards about, yes, you're free to go to space, but it's not an absolute freedom to do anything you want. There are restrictions, because we are all concerned to make sure that we don't have a tragedy of the commons. So it's incredibly important to have law. I know some of you are thinking, why do I want to go and listen to a lawyer, for goodness sake, right? But in this case, law is important. It has meant that, notwithstanding, since 1957 to now, since the day I was in nappies until now, imagine in your mind what has changed. The whole world has changed infinitely. Technology has changed infinitely. Our ability to do things in space has changed infinitely. We've managed to garner all these incredible benefits from space. We're looking to do more and more and more. And because we have these rules in place, it has meant that, notwithstanding all this incredible change, it's changing every day, space has worked. And it's worked for the benefit of humanity. But there are real challenges now. We are almost at a crossroad. One of the challenges is, as our MC said, the idea of conflict. You hear from various sectors in various countries about how they want to dominate space, how space is a war-fighting domain, how there's going to be a war in space, it's inevitable, so we may as well prepare and put weapons in space. You hear that, unfortunately, quite often, in particular sectors of society. A huge challenge, because nobody will win a war in space. Nobody will win a war in space. We are all losers in a war in space. And so we have to, as much as and as strongly as possible, continue to say that, notwithstanding how space clearly is important for national security and military interests on Earth, I mean, we can't deny that, but it is a different area, and we can't think of it as an area where we start shooting at each other, because nobody will win in a war in space, and we will all lose. So, major challenge. Another major challenge is the question of debris. And I'll just delve on that in my next slide to give you a bit of perspective about what that means. So we need rules, but space is complex. And it has so many perspectives. It's obviously about national security interests. When we give these talks to the Malaysian government over these days, my dear partner Donna and myself, there are many ministries represented in the room, including your Ministry of Defence. They are integrally involved in understanding space. So, space is about national security. Space is about commerce. Particularly now, the private sector is involved a lot more. We're all seduced by one or two well-known names. But the private sector and the commercial value of space is growing exponentially. Indeed, during COVID, the darkest days of COVID, we all remember that, and the whole world economy was going backwards. The space economy continued to grow. And it will soon be $1 trillion economy. So the private sector, so it's about commerce. It's about, of course, politics. Space has always been about politics. That's why immediately after Sputnik, they coined this phrase, the space race, as if rather than cooperating with each other to get there, to be bigger and better and more dominant. And that thinking, sadly, still is around. We have to change that. but space is clearly about politics. And in the world that I'm very fortunate to be involved with the United Nations, you see politics all the time. In this Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space that I have the privilege of co-chairing, it's 105 countries, and it grows every year, so it's more and more and more. And it's all of the countries you would expect and more, and every decision we make has to be made by consensus. What does consensus mean? Nobody says no. So we have to get in this really difficult geopolitical world that we live in, and we're clearly in very, very difficult times. We have to get 105 countries, and as I said, every year it grows. It'll be, in 5 years, it'll be 120 countries. They all have to agree by consensus. They all have to agree, even if they don't like each other. So space is about politics. Space is about science. Of course, space is about exploration. Space is about culture. Space is about ethics. Space is about indigenous perspectives. Space is about who we are. It's got aspects of religiosity about it. Space is so multifaceted, so multifaceted. And so as we try to work out, because it's a continuing work, we've got lots of great rules, but things are changing all the time. So we need to add to that framework in this consensus pattern of multilateralism. But as we do that, we've got to make sure that we understand the questions before you can even come up with the answers about preserving or trying to preserve the safety, security, stability, and sustainability of space. And so we have to make sure that we listen to all of these voices in those perspectives. And that's really hard. That's really hard. We have to make sure we just don't listen to the loudest voices in the room. We have to listen to every voice in the room. You may not agree with every voice in the room, but we have to listen to it. And we're continuing on this journey to build more and more appropriate rules. I have the honour of being asked by these countries to draft rules about new types of activities in space. Obviously, I will present that draft, and then it's up to the countries to negotiate on it. So whatever is agreed and presented to the General Assembly will look very different from my initial draft, but I have the honour of starting that process. And all of those countries will have their own views, their own perspectives, their own histories, their own traditions, their own cultures, their own economies, their own political values, their own alignments, you know, the list goes on, and their own perspectives and the perspectives of all of those within those countries. And so we need to listen to all of those perspectives. We may not agree, but at least we have a better chance of constructing more and more rules that will work for space if we have a holistic view about what's important. It's really important to do that. Because whatever rules we make, they have to last not for 1 or 2 or 5 years, but for 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years. I mean, we'll build more and more, but whatever rules are created set standards for behaviour, and then that sets standards for future behaviour, and it's an ongoing process. So we have to get it right. So, let's listen to all of the voices. Here's the problem. I mean, it doesn't look very good on the slide. The Earth is looking a bit like it's lost a bit of weight there. It's a bit narrow. But you get the idea. This is a NASA projection. I think it's NASA. A NASA projection of what the Earth looks like now. And this is only the stuff that we can see and track. Some say that the Earth already, but certainly in the future, if we keep on going the way we are, will look like Saturn with a ring around it. Yeah. What a disaster. Okay, let me give you some numbers. I don't know whether you can read that, but it doesn't matter. Okay, I will give you. So, you all know when I was born, right? 1957. Since the time that I was born until now, humanity has probably launched into space about approximately 14,000 objects. Approximately. 14,000 objects. According to the European Space Agency, as a result of all of that activity over 67 years, we have hundreds of millions of pieces of debris in Earth orbit. Hundreds of millions of pieces. All travelling, remember, at astronomical speeds, so that if it hits another object, both objects will be destroyed and the rest is history. We can only, with our technology, we can only see, out of those hundreds of millions of pieces of debris, we can only see about 40,000 of them, the big ones. So that's a reflection of the 40,000. But there are literally hundreds of millions of pieces that are smaller than about 10 centimetres, yeah, that we can't see, and yet they are equally destructive if they hit something. So it's not a pretty picture. It's not a pretty picture. Of course, space is a big place, but it's not a pretty picture. Okay, that's fine. 67 years, 14,000 objects, hundreds of millions of pieces of debris. If the well-publicised plans of a number of countries and a number of companies come to fruition in, let's say, the next 10 to 15 years, we will be sending up 100, maybe 300 or 400,000 more objects. Okay? 67 years, 14,000 objects. Next 10 to 15 years, 300,000 objects. So, an exponential growth in what we're sending up there. And so we are making a hazardous place more hazardous. We've had many collisions already which create debris. We've had many near misses. There are times when people who are watching these things literally hold their breath as two objects, one perhaps going in an equatorial orbit, one perhaps going in another orbit this way, and we can see them. Remember, we can only see a small number of them, but ones we can see. And we calculate there's a high probability that they will cross and collide. And so people hold their breath as this happens, and this is an increasing event. Indeed, some researchers at various universities predict that within the next 20 years, if we don't do anything about it, we will have a major collision between big satellites. When I say big satellites, I'm talking about something that's, let's say, the size of a combi van, weighing 2 tons, 3 tons, whatever. So I'm not talking about necessarily microsatellites. But if a microsatellite or a small satellite hits one of those, it'll still destroy it. We've had so much in terms of additional debris created by humans deliberately. We've had a number of countries deliberately shooting down their own asset with an anti-satellite, essentially as an exercise in geopolitics. You know, beating their chest and say, look what we can do, don't mess with us. And of course, if you deliberately create debris by shooting something, you're adding significantly to the problem. In addition to the problem up there, we're having increasing problems in terms of things falling back to Earth. On the next slide, you'll see some pictures of things falling down back to Earth in Australia. But Malaysia, there's been, I think in 2022, you had some space debris falling down in Sarawak. But every now is finding stuff falling on your back into your backyard. It's not going to fall on your head. I mean, the risk of that happening is infinitesimal. But the more we send up, the more that will come back down. There'll be explosions, there'll be ultimately things that fail, etc., etc. And here's the real issue. And this gets to the heart of the sustainability issue. Remembering, sustainability in space is crucial for sustainability on Earth. Already in the 1970s, a well-known NASA scientist, Donald Kessler, predicted this. He said, if we're not careful, as we create more and more debris, we will have more and more collisions in space. Collisions, of course, will create more and more debris, which creates more and more collisions, and the unvirtuous circle continues to the point where it becomes irreversible. So we call that the Kessler effect. Some people think we're almost there. We are certainly close to that point where if we continue as a business as usual approach, we will hit that tipping point where space then becomes unsustainable, unnavigable, inaccessible, unusable, with the devastating, literally catastrophic effects that will have back on Earth for all of us. Everybody will suffer. Everybody will suffer. And so we need to change our thinking about space. Everybody understands how incredibly beneficial space can be. Every country wants to be seen as being a spacefaring nation, as showing that it has technological leadership and prowess and great and clever people. Nothing wrong with that at all. And remember, fundamental principle, everybody is free to go to these commons. But we need to change the thinking so that we understand that what we do over here will have consequences over here. And let me just give you one example. This is not meant as an individual criticism of one company, but it's an example. So you're all aware, or you've all heard of the Starlink small satellite constellation. I don't know whether the people here in Malaysia use it, but it's very well known. So when Starlink was established, the marketing of Starlink, was this. They say, look, we're going to create a constellation which allows, let us say, the 30% of people on the Earth who don't have connectivity on a regular basis. We're going to allow or enable that 30% to have connectivity. And with all of the benefits that connectivity will give, right? You all know that the internet, there's many bad things about the internet, but it has probably made your lives better. And you think, wow, that is a fantastic aim. This company, sure, they'll make money, but they're going to increase the life capacities of 30% of the world by giving them connectivity. Absolutely laudable aim. But the consequences of that is that to create this network of connectivity on a continuous basis around the world with that technology, they literally need to put up 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever the number is, 1,000 objects into space. So everything is a balance. Benefit, consequence. Benefit, consequence. And so we need to try to understand more the balance. We need to understand that we need to prioritize what we can do in space. If we can do 500 things in space, let's say, because of technology, that doesn't mean we should do all 500 of them. We need to begin to prioritize what are the important things that, and my mantra always is, that allow us to maximize the benefits but minimize the risks. It's a thinking thing. It's a change of thinking. And so we need to go back to all of those voices, not just the loudest voices. And we need to have that 7+ generation thinking. And I know a lot of you are thinking, well, you know, it's really not that important. You know, it doesn't affect me. I'm just going to do whatever I can to utilize space and let others worry about it. But if we globalize that thinking, then in a sense, humanity is doomed, literally. And so let me leave you with 3 overarching principles that I think we need to understand about how and if and why we must preserve space and the sustainability of space. I've given you all of the practical ideas about why it's so important, but how do we do that in this incredibly complicated world that we're in? So here are my 3 overarching principles. If we get this right, we all get the Nobel Peace Prize, okay? So the first one for me is that notwithstanding our differences, and clearly this is a really troubled world we're in and there are so many differences, but notwithstanding our differences, we have much, much more in common when it comes to space. So even if I don't like you and you don't like me, and we won't necessarily cooperate, and in fact we will compete with each other, both of us have a common interest to be able to access and utilize space. And if I do something in an attempt to disrupt your ability to utilize space, then that will also backfire on me. So we have much more in common. And so notwithstanding all of the rhetoric you hear about domination and we're the good guys and they're the bad guys and, you know, we have to be there first and we have to be the biggest. I mean, that's competition, that's geopolitics, that's rhetoric. But underlying that, we have much more in common. And if we screw it up, we all suffer. And who suffers the most in space? It'll be the major countries who will suffer the most. So, first principle we have to apply is try to push the commonality, the common interests we have, notwithstanding the fact that we may not like each other. The second aspect of space is its humanity. I've said at the beginning, it's all about humanity. The future of humanity is dependent on space. The future of humanity is not dependent on countries making a lot of, or companies making a lot of money in space. The future of humanity is dependent upon the way we preserve and respect space for ourselves and for that 7+ generations. And then the third element is one where we can all share. We are all custodians of our ecosystem. We don't, forgetting property law, we don't own our ecosystem. We are just one small part of a much, much, much broader ecosystem. And there is an intrinsic responsibility on every one of us in the room to act in a responsible way, recognizing our custodianship. We are stewards of the planet. We're doing a pretty terrible job. We're doing a pretty terrible job of that on Earth, as you know, despite the best efforts of many. And we have major challenges, and we need to change our thinking there as well. But we are also stewards in relation to the space that we can access. We are part of an ecosystem. We must not think of space purely, as some do, in terms of something we can take from, we can exploit. We have to recognize we're part of a broader system. We have to recognize space is fragile. It is an environment. It's an ecosystem. And we don't, and that's not what it should look like. We won't be able to clean that up. I mean, there's lots of technology companies saying they'll be able to grab pieces of debris. The problem is far too big to actually clean it up with the technology that we will develop in the next 20, 30, 40, 100 years. But we have to do whatever we can, encourage that technology, even though it won't solve the problem. It'll help. But we have to change the way we think about the global commons. We have to change the way we think about areas that, at first sight, are there for our benefit. Space is not there for our benefit. We can use it in responsible ways and benefit from that, but that's not why space is there. So we are stewards. So keep those three messages in mind. We all have more in common about space than differences. We need to understand that space is about humanity, and we need to understand that we, each one of us, have a role as stewards and custodians of an ecosystem around us. Those are the lessons that First Nations people around the world teach us. And we sometimes don't listen, but we need to listen. So I'm optimistic because more and more people are understanding the importance of space. 20 years ago, if I would have given this talk on sustainability, my darling wife and I and Faros would have been the only ones in the audience. You know, you've all given up of your time, thank you, to come and listen. Because it's something, maybe you're curious, maybe you know nothing about it, but hopefully you'll go away and at least think that we need to think about the environment of space and the ecosystem and our place in the world, and our place in the broader world, and act in that responsible way. And of course that sounds very idealistic, but really we have no choice. We have no choice, because the alternative is something that is just, something we just cannot contemplate. So I'll stop there. I hope I haven't taken too long, and depending on what our MC says, if there are questions, I'm very happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Emeritus Professor Steven Freeland. Can I have the light to go on again? Okay, untuk makluman semua, di angkasa lepas sejak 1957, since 1957, Sputnik yang mula-mula dilancarkan ke angkasa lepas. Sebelum tu ada beberapa percubaan. Sputnik jatuh balik ke bumi. Tu space debris kan, dia jadi debris. Okay? Dan sekarang ni ada 100 juta, 100 million debris. 300, oh. Ada 300 juta sampah di angkasa lepas sana. Daripada aktiviti orang-orang yang telah meneroka ke angkasa lepas. Banyak. Dan kalau satu debris yang kecil melanggar satelit dia rosak. Ini masalah dia. Dia jadi sampah di atas sana banyak. So itu challenge dia. Jadi mungkin satu usaha melalui undang-undang untuk supaya memastikan bahawa tidak ada lagi sampah sebenarnya di atas sana. Walaupun usaha itu sangat mencabar, dan saya buka kepada soalan kepada siapa yang nak bertanya. Anyone to ask question, please raise your hand. Yeah, please tell your name.
Hello. Hi. Steven, it's always lovely to listen to you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your session actually. My name is Uma Shankri Arutas. I'm engineering manager for a private airline in Malaysia. So talking about Starlink as well, Starlink has already approached our private jets for internet connectivity, saying that they could have disconnected connectivity throughout the flight. Okay, my question would be, it's regarding, we know that we have lots of space debris and re-entries and also breakups, and which would fall back. But do we have I would say, like a collaboration with the aviation industry per se, because whatever that falls down, it has to pass through the airspace and only then it would land. Knowing that we have also cases like landed objects in Australia and also Malaysia. So what are the steps that we are taking, perhaps from UNISA to ICAO or for civil aviation agencies throughout the world?
Thank you. It's lovely to see you. Thank you. So there are, the United Nations has got many agencies that each have their particular mandate. The one agency that I talk about is the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. Its mandate is to look at issues about space from a scientific perspective and from a legal perspective and deal with it and try to resolve and continue to govern, have governance frameworks by consensus. There's another body which some of you might have heard of called ICAO. COPOS is based in Vienna. There's another body called ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, based in Montreal, that deals with commercial airspace and commercial traffic. And you would have thought it would be incredibly logical for those two bodies to sit and meet every weekend and compare notes and work out how they can collaborate, which is the basis of Ulma's question. But it doesn't work like that at the international level, as much as we would like. We have all of these agencies. Just think of a government. It doesn't have to be Malaysia or Australia, but just think of a government where you've got a Ministry of Finance and a Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a Ministry of Defence and a Ministry of Industry and a Ministry of Home Affairs. They've all got separate mandates. You would think they would talk together all the time and compare notes. It doesn't work like that. Maybe it does in Malaysia much better than it does in Australia. Right? But at that UN level, it's very difficult to get large bureaucratic, geopolitical organizations to sit down and think about expanding their mandate or expanding their responsibilities or working with another group. The people who represent Malaysia, COPOS, are very different, probably from different ministries, to the people who represent Malaysia at ICAO, for example. So even within Malaysia, they don't necessarily liaise. So to have these organizations talking to each other, of course, it's logical. You'd think it makes sense, but it doesn't happen. I've been involved in lots of, we form joint committees between space community and the air community, but they don't really go very far. There's lots of nice work, lots of nice words. We have great dinners. It's wonderful. But from a tangible perspective, and the issue that we're mainly talking about is not so much debris, but suborbital flights. Those flights that, say, Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson have been advertising. You go up to space and come down. You don't go into orbit, but you go into what we call space and then come back down. And, is that something that the air community should regulate or the space community should regulate? You can't really have both regulating because then you're really lost because they're different sorts of rules. And they can't agree. They can't agree yet. So Ulma's question is the perfect question to ask. Stephen's answer is the worst possible answer. That, it's very difficult to get different mindsets to speak to each other and try to come up with common approaches.
Okay, we are still facing difficulty. Next question, anyone? Please, raise your hand.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
I'm AJ, and I'm actually involved in a group of technology companies, and we also are involved in some space technology. I also consult with a law firm here in Kuala Lumpur. So I've actually got two questions for you. The first question is, looking at the crystal ball, when do you think humanity can be a spacefaring civilization? And the second question that I have is taking into your account your philosophical underpinnings of commonality, humanity, and custodianship. I am just wondering aloud how you can actually put your philosophy, your 3 underpinnings into practical application, because of the fact that humanity or humankind has not done very well with commonality, humanity as well as custodianship here on Earth. How are we going to apply that in outer space? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Please call me Stephen. Thank you for your question. So, when will we become a off-Earth species?
A spacefaring civilization.
Spacefaring civilization. I'm not sure what the definition of a spacefaring civilization is. Remember, we've had humans permanently in space already since 2001. Every day since 2001, there have been humans in space on the International Space Station. But we're not a spacefaring species, if you like. People talk about millions of people living off Earth, or hundreds of thousands of people living off Earth. When will that happen? Well, it certainly won't happen in my lifetime. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I'm not convinced that we will get millions of people off Earth anyway. Remembering, of course, and I didn't even touch on this, if we screw up space and the debris makes it really hazardous, are we going to fly humans through that, as well? But let's assume we can get significant numbers or numbers of people living off Earth. Let us say on the moon, as an easy example. We will then need to create laws to apply to those people, because life on the moon will be very different from life on Earth. And you can't have, let us say, 20 people from 20 different countries. What law will apply to them on the moon? You can't teach them the law of their own country will apply, because you can't have 20 people in that on each other in the hazardous, the hazards that they exist under, having 20 different laws. We will need to create laws that are appropriate for humans to live off Earth, if we get to that point of significance. Remembering that humans are humans, right? We are sadly flawed. We have flaws. Humans will go to space. If they live there, they'll want to get married, they'll have kids, they'll kill each other, they'll do all sorts of, the first two are happy, but the last one not. They'll do all sorts of things that humans do, right? And we'll need to try to start creating a legal framework for that. And there's a whole range of ethical considerations. There's so many considerations. But I'm not convinced, but maybe because I'm just old-fashioned, I'm not convinced that we will have hundreds of thousands of people living off Earth. Not for many, 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 many years. The second question is, as I said, you might think I'm idealistic with these ideas of common interest and custodianship and humanity. It doesn't happen in practice. Well, it's a really good point. So I work in grubby is the wrong word, but I work in the grubby intergovernmental multilateral system, right? Where every country is there to propel its own interests. In the end, we have to get them to agree, but every country is there to propel its own interests. And let me tell you that, they don't sit down and talk about some of these issues willingly in terms of the things that I've mentioned. But it's a question of perseverance. It's a question of having the discussion. So I chair COPOS, these 105 countries, and they have decided, now you might think this is a good or bad thing, but humanity has decided that we want to exploit the resources of the moon and maybe other celestial bodies. Right? Exploit, dig up water ice or whatever, right? Humanity has decided they want to do that. It's very much in the news. And so my working group, which is the 105 countries, even though it's called a working group, we have to come up with the rules, and that's the rules that I'll be writing in the next 6 months. And we've had maybe, I don't know, I've got a 5-year mandate, we've probably had about 50 meetings of the 105. And lots of discussions and, lots of things. We've got a clear mandate of what we've got to do. And guess what? Out of all of those discussions, we've now set up a list of things that will be relevant to consider in these future rules, which I'm now drafting. And we've got in there ethical considerations. We've got in there environmental considerations. We've got in there Indigenous perspectives. Now, that would never have happened had we not continually given forward that message. I'm a bit like a broken record, but you've got to be a bit of a broken record, in different ways, and persuade, and listen, but also try to persuade. And we are, on the issues that at least I'm dealing with, we're managing to begin to get those issues in. I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, and we're nowhere near the end of that process, and who knows what will happen in the next 2 years of my mandate. But the fact that we've got it there in the first place is, almost a miracle, given where we started off from. So, I think it's just continually putting forward rational arguments, reasons, discussion, with all of those voices in the back of your head. And, I think we will get there, although it won't be perfect. Nothing is perfect. Everything is a compromise. So, I think it's an excellent question, but I am very cautiously optimistic.
Okay, terima kasih. Any other question, please? Yeah.
I think there was
One up there.
You've got a lot of climb.
Yeah.
Can you shout out?
Nampaknya perjalanan kita masih jauh untuk mencapai. Ya.
We'll wait till the microphone comes. So,
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
yes, very well.
I'm a final year law student. So, you know how there are certain countries and companies that do activities like resource mining of the moon or asteroids mining. And as far as I know, the Outer Space Treaty, it prohibits sovereignty claims, but it does not address issues like owning or extracting resources from the space. So my question is, how does the current legal principle balance between the need of resource utilization and also the national prohibition of celestial bodies? Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, you study space law, I presume.
No.
Wow, you should come down here and give a lecture on space law. So, without wishing to go too much into detail, remember this is a global commons, that we're talking about. And remember I said no country can claim any part of space to be their own. Any part. Either the void of space or on a celestial body. We call them celestial bodies. Okay, so you can't claim it. There's no sovereignty in space. Yet, people want to, I hate using this expression, I don't really mean it, but dig up now resources and take them and deal with them in particular ways, for sustainment of life, but also maybe in the future even for commercial use. And so the question is, how do you rationalize those two ideas? And it's a really interesting question. PhDs have been written about that. But the fact of the matter is, humanity has decided they want to do this, right? For better or for worse. And I can't express a public view about what I think about that. But that's what they want to do. And so the way international law works is it's interpreted by countries. So countries saying, yes, we understand we can't claim it for ourselves, but yes, we want to dig up bits and then use that for ourselves, or for whatever purpose. Countries have said that doing the second thing is not breaching the first thing. That's their understanding and interpretation. So my job is to now say, well, how? What are the constraints? What are the restrictions? What are the rules about doing that remain consistent with the fundamental principles, but also at the same time maximize benefits, minimize risks, because there will always be risks. And so, you speak to 100 lawyers and they'll have 100 different views about what the law says, but the way international law works is it's a question of interpretation. And essentially, every country, virtually, has said, you know, maybe not 10 years ago, but now the country has said, we want to do this, and so we've got to work out how it is. So it's no longer a question of whether it's lawful or not lawful. In a sense, it's lawful, but we've got to put absolute constraints around how it's done, because you know, again, if we don't, then we will create all sorts of unsustainable consequences from that. So I haven't really answered your question, but law is a dynamic thing, really. I hope they teach you that in law school. Law is dynamic, yeah, as well as being certain, it also is flexible. And that's part of the beauty, but also part of the weakness of international law. So we can have a chat later about that.
All right. Any other question? So, what is your time? Phone?
Yeah.
Mine is 9:39. Are you the same? Yeah. Oh, we are the same. Thank you for satellites. Making our time same. So we have 10 more minutes before we start our show for you all. So, any other question, please? Yeah. Yeah, the nearest, the closest.
Thank you so much for that. I would like to circle back to I would like to circle back to what you mentioned just now. My question would be on terms of managing the dynamics between nation when we get into international law. Right? Like what I'm viewing it as currently I'm the head of sustainability of an MNC. Looking at into the managing several countries and looking at into their view while also looking at into how they are pursuing a certain agenda, right? So in this particular segment of topic itself, how do you manage the dynamics of each of the countries while also looking at into each of the countries bring their own interests on the conversation? And for example, the debris that we are looking at into the countries that putting more debris might have a different views on how it should be managed compared to the country that I don't have anything of space. So why should I be bothered about it? So how do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, everybody should be worried about debris, even if they're not themselves in space, because every economy is dependent. So the question is, you know, how do you reconcile trying to get everybody to agree on a common thing that makes sense, but yet every country, I mean, we all elect our leaders and our governments to give the best interest for our own country. I mean, that's the golden rule of international relations. Every country will act in its own best interests, right? And that's what we expect from our government. But even that thinking is not necessarily completely in sync with what I'm saying. But given that's the reality, we need to, you know, I spend a lot of my time, I'm not the only one, I spend a lot of my time just sitting down and listening to the perspective of particular countries and why they have a particular view about something, and then listening to others, and then you work out. It's you know, I'm a bit of a facilitator, if you like, and bringing people together. And it's like any negotiation, and in law school they've got to teach you how to negotiate and how to mediate. It's trying to find those common areas, but it's really hard. And the problem with space is that because we have all these geopolitical tensions in the world now. You know, I don't need to tell you what's going on in the world. It's not a pretty place from a geopolitical viewpoint. And we are translating that geopolitics into the way we think about space, which is completely counterproductive. Of course, it's natural because that's what, you know, countries don't divide, if you like, their thinking, but it's completely counterproductive. And so what I try to do is find common areas, even amongst the Russians and the Americans, even amongst the Greeks and those from Turkey, even amongst, you know, certain countries in the Middle East. You know, it's really hard, but when it comes to space, you know, look at space, right? We have a war going on in Ukraine at the moment, and yet there is cooperation going on still. I was in the UAE not long ago, and I saw a group of the astronauts from Expedition 69, and we had 2 UAE, we had 3 Americans, and we had 2 Russians. You know, that cooperation between Russia and the United States is going on as we speak in space. During the height of the Cold War, you had a Russian, a Soviet and an American capsules, they docked, and you had this famous handshake between an astronaut and a cosmonaut, which, you know, gives rise to so much hope. So we're lucky we're dealing with space because it is different, but we've got to convince people it's different. As I said, you've got to be a bit of a broken record and continue in a rational, respectful, but, you know what you believe in and what you've got to do. And civil society, all of you, if anything I've said tonight touches you at all, you have a role to play. Make sure in what you do, but also in those that make decisions. Make sure that, you know, the best interests of the ecosystem are at least at the forefront of decision making. But it's hard. There is no magic bullet. There is no magic answer. But you know, you do it because you've got to do it. You keep trying. And we have reached consensus. All of the laws that we have in space over the 67 years or whatever, all of them have been agreed by consensus in this multilateral world that we have. Everybody had a chance to participate in that process. If you have a chance to participate in a process, if you essentially have a power of veto, right? Remember, it's consensus amongst now 105 countries, then ultimately, whatever is agreed, sure, it's a compromise, but life is a compromise. But something which is ultimately agreed, you have had the opportunity to contribute, to have your voice heard, to make clear your perspectives. You will have a lot more ownership in the final result than having it imposed by one or two upon you. And so, you know, the process is slow and ponderous and sometimes extremely frustrating. That we have this consensus-based approach is actually a really powerful thing. And we've had so much success notwithstanding all the differences. So, you know, you've got to be cautiously optimistic, but it's hard.
Oops, okay, all right. One more question, I think the last one. Oh, two. We still have 5 more minutes again. Very fast, quick.
We've got one there, and I think there was something.
The mic, boleh sampai? Tak sampai? Okay. Who the first to get the mic? Okay, yeah, quickly.
Hi, mine's just a quick clarifying question about something from your slide. In the slide about stakeholders, making sure everyone's voice is heard, not just the loudest one. One of the listed voices was religion. So my question is, what sort of input would come from a religious voice?
Well, I mean, religion, again, it's a definitional thing. But religion and spirituality is an incredibly important part of space. For example, just to give you an example, you would have heard perhaps in the paper that an American company which advertises itself as, you know, you pay them X, whatever it is, $1,000, $20,000, $30,000, give them some DNA or some remains of a loved one, and they'll fly it and crash it into the moon. That's their marketing, right? That's their service. And so an American company was looking to do that. Remember what I said before, again, I don't want to cast aspersions necessarily, but if we can do 500 things in space, we need to prioritize what are the 300 we should be doing. But anyway, when this company, which was then part of a NASA, a broader NASA project, was going to space, the Navajo Indians, which is one of the larger First Nations people in the United States, the chief of the Navajo spoke out against this and said this is completely contrary to our spiritual feelings for space. So religion, it's a loaded word. I think your point's absolutely valid. You know, perhaps I mean spirituality there or something. But, you know, for all of us, space touches you. When you jump in the water, my darling wife and I live her parents live on this river in south of Sydney, and it's extremely strong tides. And when you jump in the water and the tide takes you, you know, you're actually being pulled towards the moon, you know, or away from the moon. You know, what an extraordinary thought that is, you know. So there's a spiritual aspect. If you looked up at the moon and saw huge cranes on the moon, or something like that, we would all be offended. I was recently in Germany and I saw an art exhibition that depicted the moon in art over the last 800 years. And you've got paintings of the moon, you know, people watching the moon or whatever, from the, you know, from the Renaissance, from every aspect of art. You know, what an incredible thing. So I put it to you that each one of you, somewhere, has a bit of spirituality when it comes to space, generally. So, obviously, various groups have, you know, brought it, it's a really important part of their culture. So that's what I really mean by that. I hope that helps. Okay, one more question? Oh.
Hi, thank you for a great presentation from you. I am Aisha, a data scientist. So I've met one Australian guy last week at IEE event, and he shared with me how great Australians in terms of, I mean, like the governments and also the citizens in protecting the place and the environment there. Some places still having the bottle scale of 0. So I want to ask you, how did you guys do that, and what is our role as an astronomy enthusiast in raising awareness among Malaysians regarding this?
Sorry, protecting what? What was it?
Like the environment, like you guys still have many places that have a bottle scale of 0?
When you say you guys, do you mean Australia?
Australian, yes.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
How do we do that, Donna? I don't know, you know, our environmental record is probably not as good as you would like to understand. You know, there is strong civil society outcry. You know, there's a lot of, for example, we have the Great Barrier Reef. You've all heard of the Great Barrier Reef. Some of you have probably been there, right? There's real concerns about the impacts that climate change have on bleaching the coral in the Great Barrier Reef, which is this extraordinary thing. You know, not only World Heritage listed, but it's unique in the world. And civil society is really strong in speaking out. So, you know, governments around the world sometimes are not great at doing these things. It really falls back on you and, you know, everybody in the room to have a strong voice. If you feel strongly about environmental concerns and the ecosystem, as I said before, you know, you have a voice, and those that you elect into government need to hear that voice. They need to listen to all of the perspectives as well. I'm glad that Australia has that reputation. You know, we tend to hear the bad news rather than the good news, so I'm glad that you're hearing good news about our country. But it's about civil society. It really is about civil society.
Thank you.
Okay, last question maybe? One? Yeah.
Where's the microphone? The person to...
Di sebelah sini tak ada mic.
Okay, tak apa.
Oh, maybe yeah, yes.
Hello, Professor. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I like it so much. But one point that you really shared out is the debris in outer space. Okay. So my concern, because we are a space-faring nation moving forward, and we're quite a latecomer. By the time we get there, it's actually all populated, so we can't do anything much. So is it how critical is the concern of the space debris in outer space compared to the effort of cleaning it up? That's one. Another perspective I would like to put, you see, when people pollute the air, you know, we got carbon tax, and then you have the ESG and all these things. So you penalize companies and countries who pollute much, and they have to pay tax in return. So is there a kind of mechanism that goes to the space companies who put up objects into space? It's either you clean up the mess or you pay somebody else to clean up for you. So I think there are a few companies out there such as Astroscale from Japan who's doing debris cleaning. But I think it's a bit on the slow side because we are not giving more companies opportunity to showcase whatever technology that they can show. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I slightly disagree with your premise of saying, you know, there's so much going on that there's not much more that Malaysia can do if it gets up there. There's so many opportunities for Malaysia. And they don't have to necessarily do it alone either. You know, space is this wonderful area where you cooperate. So I think Malaysia has an incredible opportunity. And Malaysia is a responsible country and they'll do the right thing. And you've got, you know, wonderful space regulators and all of that. So I think there are great opportunities for Malaysia. There are great Malaysian companies and technology. You're right about Astroscale. That's just one. There are many companies that will developing technology to, as you say, clean up the mess. My point is we will never clean it up. This will never be something you can eat your food off the floor. Right? It's not going to be clean. We will begin to remediate some of the largest pieces of debris, but you know, it's extremely complex and hazardous, extremely complex, and things will go wrong. You know, there was a test by another company that has similar ideas to Astroscale, and they, you know, targeted a piece of debris and they went to grab it, and there was a failure, and then the bit that was targeting itself failed, so they actually created another piece of debris. Yeah. Now, space is hard. So the technology is important, we must encourage it, but it's not the solution. It is part of a much broader solution, which is, as I say, changing the way we think about space. If you start imposing, and one solution, and of course people have suggested, let's have polluter pays, you know, taxes and things like that. Remember what I said, space is free for all to go to. And a smallish number of countries have benefited extraordinarily by that freedom, and you know, that's helped them propel them and develop them to major industrial powers. And it's a bit like the arguments for carbon emissions. If you now say, oh my goodness, it's a really dirty place, we've got to stop others from going there and adding to the dirt. Essentially, you're saying to those who haven't yet had the opportunity, like Malaysia, say, haven't had the opportunity to go to space and fully develop its opportunities and capabilities and benefits, by saying, well, either you're restricted or you've got to pay to go or something like that. One, you're contrary to that freedom principle, but secondly, it raises a whole lot of issues about equity. Same with carbon emissions, right? And so the argument is, well, a small number of countries have polluted it, created the mess, it's up to them to pay to clean it up, but you're never going to get them to agree to that. It's really difficult. It's the same with the climate change emissions. So there are wonderful solutions in theory. You know, where I have to work is in the grubby reality of geopolitics and working within to try to find the best possible solutions and pushing people towards it. But if you start imposing imposts, you will have every emerging spacefaring nation saying, wait a minute, this is completely unfair. They create the mess, and now you're punishing us and restricting us from having that ability to access space. Of course, that's a strong argument. You know, you may think, well, that's the price you pay, but it doesn't really fit in with our notions of equity. So again, I haven't answered your question. There's no simple solution. The solutions are multifaceted, and we need to all sit down and really think about this, not just on a nationalistic perspective, but in a broad, holistic, global perspective. Anyway, thank you for your question.
Okay, I think we stop here. No more question, I think? Yeah? Okay, all right. Give a big hand to Professor Steven Freeland. an interesting talk. I think we stop the talk here and we will watch a video on space. I should be giving a live lecture, but I think time is not permitting, so we continue with the lecture. I think before we stop, we can hear that the road is still, it's still a long way to solve the problem. 100 billion debris. But I think by thinking on ourselves, is that how about us? We drive every day to office, we still use hydrocarbon, and we still polluting the environment every day. But that's benefit by driving to office. So I think it's the same problem, that we want the benefit, but we still polluting the environment. Okay? Then the new technology come with electric vehicle. There is no more carbon dioxide. Okay? Poured into the environment. Maybe what Professor said just now is that there is, but there is also a perspective of technology that maybe in the future, satellite that we set up, no more debris, or the satellite will go down safely without being a debris in the outer space. But it's still a long way that we have to be patient, and we have to go there, and we have to be the custodian of the space. Thank you very much. Again, a big hand to Professor Steven Freeland. Okay, all right, I think we will stop here. The title? We are Astronomers, a show from Planetarium. Please enjoy, sit back and relax and enjoy the movie We Are Astronomers from Planetarium Negara. Thank you very much.